guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. And I've got a wealth manager for the audience today, Andrew Van Alstyne, coming from North Carolina. And he's got an MBA. He's no stranger to the show. All the audience are familiar with investments, assets, wealth management. And so I'm really happy to have him on the show to talk about him and his company and what he does. So, Andrew, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me today. Excited to be here.
Yeah, so I know you and kind of introduce yourself, your company, your business, how the audience can benefit from our interaction today.
Absolutely. So Andrew Van Alstyne, Charlotte, North Carolina, just outside. I run my own practice tucked into our RIA, which is based out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. My client base are primarily higher net worth individuals that are looking not only to continue to grow the wealth that they have obtained through hard work over the years, but also the clients that I look to focus on are also focused in their legacy planning. So they're looking at to maintain multi-generational wealth, have a smooth and efficient transfer of wealth between generations, and really have a vision and a philosophy that outlasts their life here on Earth.
It's interesting. And, we talk about wealth management and kind of generational wealth. There's one school of thought which was really interesting was this book called Die with Zero. And basically kind of the premise was the government's going to take it, or inflation, or like you put your money in there and it's basically these excess fees. And then there's another school of thought, which you have, is, kind of leave it for your generations. Compare and contrast these two ideas because, some people are like, yeah, I scrimp and save, and at the end of 80 years, the government took it, or the stock market took it, or some swindler took it. So how do you reconcile these two diverging thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, they're both, to me, financial planning as a whole, it's a lot like religion. There's a bunch of books out there. There's a bunch of different philosophies on what the correct way to carry forward those ideas are. And you really just have to find the one that resonates with you and your goals in life. To the point of what you mentioned, as far as being frugal and saving or spending to the fullest, I don't necessarily see that there's really a difference at the end of the day. I think that both are possible. I think that you can save correctly and still live life the way you want to lead it. It just needs to be very intentional in everything that you do. I think that if it's something where you can 100% die with zero in your bank account, but you've had the conversations, you've spent the time with your family members, you've embraced them and have equipped them to carry forward your ideologies, and using your tool along the way, or your finances along the way, as a tool to accomplish those goals while still enjoying life along the way. So it's something where I feel that both are possible. I think that a lot of books are trying to, they're looking for catchphrases and hit pieces for news articles and for headlines. And I get that. And there's a point to it. And when you dive into these books, some of them go full tilt into it and some of them throttle it back. Even you see even a divergence within certain philosophies. But I don't think that there's a right way either way. It's something where if you truly feel that dying with a ton of financial assets in a bank account is the right way, if that's your intentionality and that's what you want to go about doing, there's ways to go about doing it. And there's clients that I come across and have worked with that feel that way. And it's my job at that point to let them know that it's okay to enjoy life at certain parts. And there's other people that well into the mid to high six-figure income and don't have a penny left at the end of the month in their bank account. And those are the people that you kind of need to say, you're getting every last moment out of life, but it might be time that we take a step back and look at where this money's actually going, and if that's the highest and best use for what your long-term goals are.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It kind of dives down to, money as a tool. And, there's, you always have to save and invest and have, and then there's just, like I said, I wanted to compare and contrast these two opposite extremes. So kind of moving into it, one thing is talking about is the, this idea of financial literacy. And, in today's age, it's really important. Back in my age, wasn't that important because you had jobs and you had stable economies and stable governments, but now you don't have that. So it's really important, and schools obviously don't teach this. So what steps can people take to improve their financial education? To educate themselves, because this is one area where the schools are falling short. So you have to step up and take responsibility for your own education.
No, that's 100% true. And, you touched on a couple of key points there. Now, our government and most governments can't balance a budget on their own accord. So how can we expect them to come up with systems to introduce into our education system where future generations are properly equipped to do so if those that are at the helm can't do so themselves? But to that point, what I think is, I think for adults, young adults, adults that may be mid-career life cycle, obviously I'm slightly biased in this, but I think that it is important to at least have a conversation with an expert in financial management. And again, it's having a conversation to at least get a sense of where you are. We work hard throughout life and we get to a point and then we find ourselves adrift at sea, not knowing if we're headed in the right direction or not. So at least having a conversation to get your bearings. Then what I think it's important to do, and what I talk to a lot of my clients about, is work very early on at educating the next generation. Get your kids involved in money conversations much earlier in life. Equip them with the knowledge to be able to make sound financial decisions earlier in life. I'm fortunate where my wife and I, we have two young kids. We have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old. They both have their own little balance sheets that, if they're doing chores around the house, we write it in there with them and we equip them. They don't necessarily understand the reasons why and the methodologies behind it, but it's giving them the soft skills now that is a common practice, where balancing a checkbook is something that very few people know nowadays. Millennials, maybe half of them know it, the other half don't. And anybody that's come since, if they log in online and their checking account shows money in it, they spend it. And then some usually. But it's something where sitting down with those younger generations and having that conversation, as they get older, as they get into their, early teen years, why are we spending this way when we go out for entertainment as a family? If we're fortunate enough to have a vacation home or vacation homes, how are we handling this property? What's being done with these properties when we're not there? And why is that the case? What are the plans for these properties when mom and dad can no longer use them? Are they going to be split up evenly? Are they going to be split up with who embraces our financial and life philosophies more so for the next generation? As they get into their college years, how is college going to be funded? What are the expectations through college as far as potentially earning income or supplementing them with some type of family stipend through college? And then on into, the dating and marriage years. How are new additions into the family going to be handled? What are their roles going to be as far as the entire family financial picture goes? But having those conversations at every step. So you're setting mile markers up. And again, this is where the intentionality with the money comes in. You're setting up goals that you're looking for them to achieve by certain ages, and then putting in the systems in place to be able to accomplish that. Nothing in life, we always want to talk about things happening naturally and organically. Nothing in life does. Anything that we want to accomplish to better ourselves or better our family does take a level of force and intentionality behind it.
Yeah, and what's interesting is because the value of money and your money stories was transferred to me as a young at a young age at the dinner table. And so you talk about these stories, and that's how you kind of learn what it is, and you have to work for it, and you have to save and invest it, and build businesses on top of it. And it's kind of what you're describing is I've always studied like the Kennedys and the Bush families. These they've done something correctly with their wealth, and talking about how they're gonna separate it. So for the audience out there, challenges and what are the challenges? Because you hear stories about there's the family fighting over the parents' money, and there's usually kind of family members, they want their piece, and it becomes like this, it kind of divides. So what are some challenges, and how do you avoid some of the divisiveness that comes from having generational wealth?
Yep. So all the ones you mentioned are key challenges that are faced. But a lot of those are handled, especially the ones that you mentioned, through having ongoing dialogue and communication early in life. One of the things that I ask for a lot of my families to embrace, and it's across the net worth spectrum, is the concept of a family bank and running the family as if it's an enterprise. This way, if you are the wealth creator in your family, if you're the first generation, it is your job and your duty to your family, if you're looking to have this multi-generational wealth, to have the conversations with the next generation, equip them and involve them in decision-making skills as early as possible. It's not to say those teenagers are going to be the one to have the yay or nay vote and be the tiebreaker, but it's something that by the time they're in their early 20s, it's almost as if you're having a board of directors with a standard of governance where everyone understands, as far as the distribution of assets after you're gone, as far as the estate goes, if you're having those proper conversations with the family board, you have a level of governance in place that everyone in the family has subscribed to and believes in and has been carrying out over the course of the years. By the time it gets to that stage, everyone already understands what's going to happen. Money has already been in motion, assets have already been getting transitioned. So to the point that you mentioned earlier, as far as die with zero, that's where that's embraced. You're already starting to de-risk yourself as you get later in life. You're starting to take more of those investable assets and transfer a lot of the risk onto the younger generations. You're taking some of the physical property and transferring the majority of the ownership and responsibilities onto the branches of the family that are actually utilizing those on an annual basis. You're finding a way to move things in that regard so that you can still uphold your standard of living. It's not necessarily having to skimp in your later years, but you're better positioning yourself and your family so that by the time the inevitable happens for all of us, things have already been in motion. Everyone has a general expectation of what's to happen, and nothing that comes from that point forward is going to be a surprise.
Interesting.
Now, that being said, there's also times where every family has a bad apple. Every family has ghosts in their closet or a relative that isn't necessarily subscribing to this. And it's okay to have the conversation, but you need to have the conversation as far as why they may not be as involved with the family's plan moving forward. And depending on the situation, even with that being said, it's still okay to still leave the door open to welcome them back in should they have a change in heart, should life environments change, and welcome them back into the family. But it's okay to have an honest conversation with those individuals as far as why they may not necessarily have the same luxuries and availabilities that other family members have who are subscribing to these philosophies and trying to carry forward the family's ideologies a little bit more intact.
Yeah, really really insightful. So next question is because I really want to talk about this because kind of when you're talking about generational wealth, you're talking about and then how do you avoid the this trust fund baby syndrome, or kind of the spoiled rich kid? Is they're like, yeah, my parents are leaving me a trust fund, so I can go party and do drugs or whatever. How do you avoid that? Empowering families through collaboration, and what practices foster effective collaboration and kind of make sure that that money is not wasted, but is actually put to good use.
No, and that's an excellent question because especially if you go late 80s into the early 2000s, that trust fund baby mentality ran rampant. I mean, it was a stereotype for a reason because you had this whole class of individuals that got to live a very lavish lifestyle without producing anything. And a lot of that generation occurred that way because trust funds were put in place because at the time people viewed them as a great tool to transfer wealth efficiently from tax liabilities. There's still a place for trust in estate planning. They still serve a purpose, but the heart of the issue gets back to a little bit of what I was saying, where a lot of the transferring of assets with this family mentality occur because family members are being a productive member of the family. The money is being utilized as a tool to increase intellectual capital. It's being used to increase social capital. It's being used to increase philanthropic ventures and societal capital in that way. But they're all contributing to the family as a whole. The reason why trust funds fail intrinsically is because the way most of them were written is that the grantor of the trust wanted to control from the grave, that they wanted to stipulate how the funds were going to be used even after they were dead. And the inheritor, the beneficiary of the trust, didn't understand how the money was obtained and the wealth was created. So they didn't have an appreciation for it. They didn't understand why the restrictions were put in place to create these golden handcuffs. And it oftentimes just created a lot of resentment, which is why you had these individuals that would just go out and be reckless with the money, to be honest with you, because as soon as they could get their hands on it, they felt the need to spend it the way they saw fit because they had no concept behind how this money was created. If you're having these conversations much earlier in life and you're getting buy-in and you're getting agreement, and it's not to say that things are going to remain stagnant. Family's philosophy can shift, it can move, it can evolve over time. But it's an ongoing dialogue that you don't necessarily need a trust to continue your philosophies after death because they're already being embraced and being exhibited while you're still alive. So you have that confidence. And if it's not, again, that's where those honest conversations come on, where you might shift the dialogue a little bit with those individuals or that branch of the family tree or what you're looking to do as far as future giving and future utilization of that tool being the wealth. But it's something where you're not getting this missed midsection, which is that conversation as far as the why.
Yeah, interesting. How can people find out more about you and, you can talk about estate planning, how to structure it correctly, what entities to set up, how to kind of make sure that the wealth is used for a good purpose after, you depart. So how can people find you and follow your work and reach out to you?
Absolutely. So social media, I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Andrew Van Alstyne. If you go to my firm's website, forfiduciary.com, if you go to meet the team, Andrew Van Alstyne, the direct link is forfiduciary.com/meet Andrew Van Alstyne. And of course, a good Google search. Most of the results that come up under my name will take up about a page and a half of your web browser.
Excellent. And I really enjoyed this conversation, kind of the higher level of, what to do and, what to do after you've accumulated and invested it well. And for all the audience, be sure to visit Andrew's resources and the links and show notes, give him a like and follow, check out his company website. And thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation.